All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the power of your word. Thank you for the beauty of your word, the promise of your word, the perfection of your word. You say that your word makes wise the simple, that it's more precious than gold that's refined 7 times. I pray you give us a little bit of that attitude toward your word today. I pray that as a result of this discussion that we would come away with a greater confidence in your word. And we pray all of it in Christ's name. Amen. So we're going to have a very nice discussion today. And I want to start it off by just reading the text, just making a few observations. And before I do, I need to explain a little something about Hebrew to you. So will you give me 3 minutes of just indulgence to explain something? So imagine in English if you had a sentence, and we've probably done this before. If that's a sentence, what does that sentence say? I love my cat. So, if we in English only used consonants, that's what we would have. We would write a sentence like that and you'd have to supply your own vowels. So that's what Hebrew is. So I'll show you something here. So if this is a Hebrew text, do you see those things that are appearing and disappearing there? Okay, those are called the vowel points. The vowel points weren't written. David had never seen anything that looked like that. Those vowel points are what people added 1,300 years later, and it would be exactly the way I've done this here. Okay? Now, in the sentence, I love my cat, is that the only thing that sentence could mean? What else could it mean? It could be, I love my city. Caught. Stayed up for 15 days writing a paper and finally went camping and, I love my cot. I leave my cot. I leave my city. I leave my cat. Cart, but we need a coat. Suppose you just got engaged and you're just so in love and just, I love my cutie. Right, that would work, right? Suppose we're in Minnesota and it's 50 degrees below zero. I love my coat. I leave my coat. And if this is implied, you could make this an imperative. Leave my city, leave my coat. Right? Now, in Hebrew, you don't have any of the You don't have any of the vowel pointing. So what you have in the text is this. But the dots, by and large, are the exact dots that you would expect given the conversation you're having. Are you talking about cats or cots or cuties or coat, right? And then it kind of determines what the other dots will mean. So are you with me? When we come to Psalm 22, I'm going to translate what it says, but on places where there's an ambiguity, I'm going to point out that there's more than one way to read it. Okay? So all I'm doing is saying if you read these dots a little differently, you might come up with a slightly different interpretation. Are you with me? Okay, so this says, for the choir master, but you also could do it for the victory maker. You also could do it for the one who causes eternity to come into play. You could read it as the word eternity. And interestingly enough, the ancient writers like the Septuagint and Ixta Hebraeus, which is a translation from the Hebrew into Latin, they all do that. They read it slightly differently. So for the choir master is kind of I love my cat version, but that's not the only way to do it. You could do it related to the word eternity. That perhaps that's how the Septuagint is doing it. Jerome, when he read it in Hebrew, did it for the one who conquers, and you can do it that way too. So I'm going to do it for the boss. That's going to try to get several of these. On the doe of the dawn, or if you do it a different way, for the help of the dawn, a melody belonging to David. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Have you heard that before anywhere? Have you heard it, Jesus cry from the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani? This is what he's quoting. He's quoting it in Aramaic, or else he's slurring his words because he's in such pain, but he's quoting this psalm. My God, why did you abandon me? Far from my salvation. Now I'm just going to say this in Hebrew. You tell me what it sounds like. Far from my Yeshuati. What does that sound like to you? Yeshua. Far from my salvation are the words of my groaning. Elohim, I cry out day and night, and you don't answer. And there is no peaceful silence for me. But you are holy, inhabiting the praises of Israel. In you, our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you, they cried out and were delivered. In you, they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man. The reproach of Adam, the reproach of Adam, the reproach of mankind, despised by the people. All who look at me mock me. They open their mouths. It's kind of a technical thing. They make motions at me with their mouths. They wag their heads. And this is what they're saying. Roll your cares on Yahweh. He'll deliver him. He'll rescue him. He'll deliver him because he's delighted in him. But you are my Gohi. You are my midwife. You're the one who took me from the belly. You're the one who took me from the womb. You made me trust on the breast of my mother. On you I was flung from the womb. From the belly of my mother, you are my God. Don't be far from me because distress is near and because there's no one who helps. Bulls, many bulls surround me. Some kind of specialty bull, the Avirei Bashan, the strong bulls of Bashan. And then this word can mean surrounded me, but it also is the word crown. In fact, this word is so related to the word crown that Jews will try to interpret this psalm of Esther because she was crowned as Ahasuerus' wife. So the bulls of Bashan, they surround me or crown me. They open wide their mouths against me like a lion roaring, tearing me to pieces and roaring. Like water, I was poured out, but all my bones were out of joint. My heart became within me like wax melting in the midst of my insides. My strength dried up like a potsherd. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. And you kept pouring me out into the dust of death. You poured me out into the dust of death over and over and over and over and over again. Dogs surrounded me. A Septuagint does it, synagogue of evildoers hems me in. And then this word is like a lion, my hands and feet. Okay, so really weird thing going on in the text. And this is what it is. So there are two different readings in this verse in the manuscripts. One reading is the word like. So this is the word like. And then this is the word lion. Have you ever heard of a Jewish person named Ari Shapiro? That means the beautiful lion. Lots of Jewish people are named Ari Shapiro. So the word lion is Ari in Hebrew. This is a verb, and there's debate what the verb means, and this is how you say they blanked. And this verb means something like to dig through with a chisel. Like you come to a rock and you use a chisel to hammer through the rock. Like a lion, they dug through or they pierced. All right? So, if we're looking at that, which one does this text read? So that's our word. Remember, the little dots are extra. So which one of the words is it? Like a lion or pierced? Like a lion. So like a lion, my hands and feet. I numbered all my bones. People are looking at me. They're staring at me. They divide my garments among themselves. On my covering they cast a lot. But you, O Yahweh, don't be far from me. My help, come to my aid. Hasten, come to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword and from the hand of the dog, my life. Save me from the mouth of the lion. Now, this is the word lion, but notice it's spelled differently from that word, right? You see it's got an extra letter there on the end. Save me from the mouth of the lion, from the horns of the Re'im, and we don't know what the Re'im are, horns of the wild ox. And then in Hebrew, all of a sudden the grammar breaks. So it's like you're into the sentence, and then it says, you've answered me. You've answered me. I will recount your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will give you praise. O fears of Yahweh, praise him. All you seed of Jacob, give him glory. Fear before him like a resident alien. Fear before him like an illegal alien without a green card. Right? That's what this word means. Fear before him like nobody's business. All you seed of Israel. Because he did not despise, he did not abominate the affliction of an afflicted one. He did not turn aside his face from him. When he cried out to him, he listened. From with you is my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay in the midst of those who fear him. The afflicted ones will eat and they'll be satisfied. They'll praise Yahweh, all those who seek him. May their heart, their singular heart, may it live forever. They will remember, they will return to Yahweh, all the ends of the world. They will worship before you all the families of the Goyim, all the families of the Gentiles, because the kingdom belongs to Yahweh, and he is ruling over the nations. They will eat and they will worship. All the fat ones of the land will tremble in fear before him, those who go down to the dust and whose soul is not alive. A seed will serve him, and it will be told to Adonai for a whole generation. They will come. They will relate his righteous act to a people yet being born. They will say, he did it. Now, may God bless the reading of his word this afternoon. What do you find interesting about all that? Jeff?
I just noticed that just now while we're reading, my translation in Psalm 30, instead of saying a seed shall serve him, it says a posterity. So.
A posterity. And that's often a choice of translators will make, whether to translate it as seed or a whole group of people, but it's the same word every time in that. Persephone?
I find it really encouraging and hopeful that the prayer was answered in the middle of it.
In that verse, it's like it's so stunning, and translators didn't even know what to do with it. It's like it just so shockingly changes, but it's like in the middle of crying out, you've answered me. What else do you find interesting?
It says that the Gentiles will be grateful for his coming. Is that what it says?
That's exactly what it says.
Pretty fascinating.
It is, when the normal Jewish attitude is the Gentiles are going to be destroyed. And it even says all the families of the earth. Have you heard that somewhere in the text before? Bless the one who blesses you and curse the one who curses you. And through you, how many families of the earth will be blessed? All. What else do you find interesting?
When it was talking about the lions and the oxen, you kind of allegory take that to mean the lions being the leaders of the church that were trying to get him taken down, and also the oxen being interpreted as the crowd, the herd that's just kind of going along with whatever they're supposed to do.
Yeah, someone has made the statement that it's kind of an anti-Eden scenario, where in Eden, the animals act like civilized people, and here the people are acting like animals. That's very interesting.
A lot of parallels to Jesus' death.
Yeah, how many did you see parallels to Jesus' death? Ton. I mean, he quotes the psalm. He may be quoting the ending when he says it has been finished. It may be connected with you have done it or he has done it. They cast lot for my, they tore up my clothes. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. They wag their heads. They flare their nostrils. If you read it, crown, they crowned me. Lots of parallels to that. And of course, there's maybe one massively powerful parallel that has to do with a textual variant. And that is...
But I was going to ask, which I know you're about to get into, but is there any difficulty in making this apply to Jesus with the line variant?
Right, you could say that just like a dead lion is hung off wood and carried between two people and the hands and feet, you could say that that's like Jesus, who's being carried on a wooden stick like you would carry a dead lion. You could do it that way. But the question is, like, which is the real reading? Now, would you grant that if the real reading is they dug through my hands and feet, would you grant that this has nothing to do with David? And this probably is just some kind of pure prophecy? Okay, but the difference, as we saw, is a very slight difference. It's really in the length of this letter. Can you tell that? Is it long or is it short? If it's short, it's like a lion. If it's long, it's they blanked my hands and feet. Now, if David wrote this, when would it have been written? So David became king in 1004, came king in Jerusalem in 1004 BC. He died in 971 BC. So, like this was written how many thousands of years ago? 3,000 years ago. And we're trying to figure out the length of one letter.
For all the hundreds and thousands of times it's been hand copied.
Let's see where it takes us. So, this is Psalm 22. Jesus' last words, ancient text and biblical theology. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, that's probably Aramaic. The Hebrew version of that would be Eli, Eli, lema azakthani. But it could be that Jesus is slurring his words because he's in such pain. So we don't know. I mean, some people argue it's Syriac. Some people argue it's Aramaic. Some people think it's trying to mimic, and we don't know. But what we do know is that these words were significant enough that writers copied them down verbatim of what Jesus said. We saw that there's a lot in the psalm that is touching on Jesus' death, and the main one in the ESV is, "They have pierced my hands and feet." So the ESV says, "They have pierced my hands and feet." Tanakh is the Jewish translation. "Like lions, they maul my hands and feet." So which way is Tanakh going with these readings? Which one is it preferring? The top one. And which one is the ESV going with? The bottom one. And the difference is part of the length of one letter. So the difference between these two readings is called a textual variant. So it doesn't matter what you're studying, Homer, Shakespeare, whatever. When you have an ancient document, ancient documents that disagree, where they disagree is called a textual variant. And there are 5 rules that you apply to any document in any language to see what the true reading of the text was. And they're called the canons of textual criticism. You can type them in on Google and it will bring them up. And they run like this. What's the oldest reading? What's the hardest reading? What reading is witnessed in most family? Which is the shorter reading, and which reading can explain where all the other readings came from. And when you're doing text criticism, no matter what language you're doing it, those are the basic canons that you come and say, well, which one of these is the oldest reading? Which one of these is the hardest reading? Which one of these readings can explain how all the other readings got there? So we're trying to find what somebody wrote 3,000 years ago. These are the tools that we need to use. And where you always start in text criticism, and you ask, which one is the oldest reading? Okay, that's going to be one of the main ones, and which one can explain how all the other ones got there? So what should we do? This is a textual variant. What should we do? Go to which one's older. So when you study Hebrew, every printed Hebrew text that's printed today is a reproduction of manuscript B19A from Leningrad. It's called the Leningrad Codex. It's in St. Petersburg, which used to be called Leningrad. And it was copied in 1008 AD. So this is a medieval manuscript. This is the actual page of Psalm 22. This was copied in 1008 AD. Every printed version of the Hebrew Bible that people walk around, if you've ever seen me walking around with that great big brown book, it looks like that's manuscript B19A. And this is it. And this is the part of the manuscript. So which one does B19A read? This one or this one? Yeah, it reads the top one because you can see this is the letter and this is the long version of the letter. So can you see on the long version, the guy writes, it's a little bit straighter, and on the short version he has this little curly part there. So it's clear that manuscript B19A reads like a lion. So any printed Hebrew Bible that you get today, you open it up to Psalm 22:16 in the Hebrew, but 17 in the English translation. Any one that you get, when you open up, you go to the reading, it's going to read like a lion. Anywhere in the world, any printed manuscript, any printed Hebrew Bible in the world. Do we stop our search there? And why do we not stop our search there? Are there older manuscripts? And it turns out there are older manuscripts. So this is the Aleppo Codex. I'll never forget, I was doing some research on Psalm 22. I'd been doing about 2 years' worth, and I was in the middle of collecting this manuscript evidence, and I knew that the Aleppo Codex is about 80 years older than B19A, and I happened to be in Israel in the Shrine of the Book, where they have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I was just walking around, and I walked up to a Hebrew Bible, and it was under glass, and it was actually the Aleppo Codex. This is the Aleppo Codex. It was copied, hand-copied, in 930 AD. What do you recognize about the Aleppo Codex, being that this was written out by hand almost more than 1,000 years ago? What do you recognize about it? Wear and tear. But my goodness, it's preserved pretty well for a book to be 1,000 years old. And whoever copied it loved the text, because look how carefully they copied. So I'm walking around the scroll of the book, Shrine of the Book. I stumble on the Aleppo Codex. I bow down to start reading it, so my face is like 3 inches from the glass. And I realize that it's open to like Psalm 35. And my heart's just like beating fast, because I think it's like 3 pages away. It's like I've been wanting to see, what does this read? Well, turns out Psalm 22 was ripped out of the Aleppo Codex. So this used to be in Aleppo, Syria, and people, whenever there was a riot, would go in and rip pages out of this Bible. And some families have had their consciences plagued, so every now and then somebody will send a page back, and have been missing 100 years, and they'll put it back. But right now, Genesis through Deuteronomy were ripped out, and some other pages, and Psalm 22 was ripped out. So we don't know what the Aleppo Codex says. Maybe that is in somebody's house. Maybe they'll send it back, but we don't know. It's gone from this manuscript. And so I think it's 2 pages that they ripped out. And so it's Psalm 15:1 to Psalm 25:1 is missing. Now, we have a thing called the Psalm Targum. And who can tell me what a Targum is? Or have you ever heard the word Targum before? Yeah, it's kind of like a Living Bible translation. Targums are in Aramaic. People stopped being able to read Hebrew, and so they needed a Bible translated in their own language. And the Psalm Targum does something called a double translation. So I make my living teaching people foreign languages for the most part. And it's very common when you have a test, if somebody doesn't know how to translate something, they'll translate it 2 different ways. That's called a double translation. And when you do that, you're saying, I'm not exactly sure which way to translate this, So I'm just going to put both in there. And ancient writers did that. And so what we have in the Psalm Targum is a double translation, biting and like a lion. So which way is the Psalm Targum doing it? The Psalm Targum is actually doing it both ways, but it's reading, when you come to this word, like a lion isn't the only way to read it. You can read it as a participle, and you can read it biters of. So you put a different little thing here, and it becomes biters of my hands and feet. So what the Psalm Targum is doing is he's coming to an unpointed text, and he's saying, I don't know how to translate this. I can translate it like a lion, so he puts it in there. But he said, I can translate it biters of. And so the Targum says, I don't know. I'm just going to put both of them in there. That's significant in that it's 7th century, and this translator says, I don't know how to do it, whether it's a noun or a verb. But still, if you're asking which one of these readings has more support, which one has more support? Like a lion. So if we go back, the next oldest thing is a thing called the Cairo Geniza, and it means the Cairo treasury. So there's a synagogue in Cairo. This is a picture of it. And have you ever had your church have a building project? Like you have a church and then you decide to build another building or something? And, when you do that, like sometimes you'll block up a hallway or block up some closets or something. And you make a new hallway to the, Family Life Center or something. Listen, people have been doing that for centuries. The Cairo synagogue did that. When they built on to it, there was a closet there, and there was a scribe who, when he copied stuff, he was supposed to burn the copies, like a flag, so it wouldn't be disgraced. But this guy was a hoarder. And so rather than burn it, he kept it. And when they built the new part of the synagogue, they bricked up his closet. And what happens after a while, when you don't use the Family Life Center anymore? Oh, well, this would be a great, blank. And what do? You kind of redo the thing and you tear down the walls. And lo and behold, they did this. And all of a sudden, it's this room full of ancient manuscripts called the Cairo Treasury. And this is what they found. Thousands of manuscripts. So do you have a question? Which did they find it? And they found it. So the 6th century manuscript, it has ka-ari, like a lion. So it's not looking too good for pierce my hands and feet, is it? Once we look at all the Hebrew manuscripts, we can look at the translations, and you may have heard of Jerome. Jerome was the guy who translated the Bible into Latin. You may have heard the term Vulgate before. That's a Latin translation. He did it in Bethlehem. There's a cave in Bethlehem where they think Jesus was sheltered when he was a baby. He did it in that little cave. There's a church built over the top of it today. You can go down, you'll look at it, you stand right there. Jerome translated the whole Bible, but living in Bethlehem, which is 5 miles outside of Jerusalem, over time he also learned Hebrew. And so after he had translated the Vulgate, when he knew Hebrew, he retranslated part of it. And the Psalms, and we have that, and it's called Iux to Hebraeus, according to the Hebrews. And so Jerome said, when I translated, I read this, they have bound, and they have bound in Hebrew is that. So what's the difference between that and these readings? This middle letter has fallen out. So Jerome says the real reading is this. So he doesn't have the Aleph there, but his reading has to be, his reading cannot be what? His reading is not this. It may not be this, but it's clearly not this. So he did, they bound my hands and feet. Turns out there are 4 different words in Hebrew that these could come from: dug through, purchase, have a feast, or bound. And Jerome is saying, I think it means bind. Before he knew Hebrew, 5 years before he did Eugs to Hebraeus, he did, they have dug, but he also said, they have dug has those same radicals. So, do you see that Jerome is the first evidence that we have that this, the pierced or dug or all the rest of it favors this reading? You with me? The Old Latin has they have dug. Aquila, who was a Christian apostate, so he converted to Christianity, then he deconverted. He wanted people not to believe in Christianity. He did a translation in Greek. He said the reading is caught. So I'm going to say this out loud in Hebrew. You tell me the difference between these pronunciations. Ka'aru and ka'aru. What's the difference between that? Ka'ru and ka'aru. So this little one that looks like the Y there, the way you make that is you squeeze your throat, and it's the sound of that little squeezing of your throat. That's the sound, and he said that's what it should read. So he says, they disfigured my hands and feet. Now this was a person who hated Christians. He deconverted. He thought Christians were preaching the wrong gospel. But what does he tell you was not the reading of Psalm 22? We've got a hostile witness that's telling me it's a verb, not like a lion. Well, he did another translation. His second translation was, they have bound. And the difference between that they disfigured and they have bound is ka-ru versus ka-ru. You didn't catch that? Neither did I. Right? But both of Aquila's translations side with what? They side with the verb, not like a lion. Symmachus has seeking to bind, and I'm not sure what he's reading, but he's not reading what? He's not reading like a lion. Theodotion is missing. The Peshitta, which was translated, we don't know who translated it, it just means the plain translation in Syriac. The Peshitta has, they pierce my hands and feet. Now, so far, what's the oldest one of all those? This one. Oh, and I blew it. So there was this kid, 2 kids actually, and they lost a sheep, and they knew their dad was going to beat them if they came home without the right number of sheep. They were in the middle of nowhere. They were walking around trying to find the sheep. They came to this place out in the middle of nowhere. There was a hole in the wall, and they wondered if the sheep had somehow crawled into that hole. And this part wasn't there when they were there. So what they did is they stood right here and they started throwing rocks. And they thought if their sheep was in there, the sheep would cry out. And so they were throwing rocks. And one of them just threw it right in the middle. The hole was only this big when they were there. Threw it in, and they heard this enormous crashing sound. Normally you don't hear like a bunch of plates crashing in the middle of the desert. And so the kid thought, there's something in there. So they climbed down into that hole. And what do they find? They find the Dead Sea Scrolls. They didn't have the sheep anymore, but they had the oldest Hebrew manuscript ever. Dad, look what I found. The dad, this will make you mad, takes it to an antiquities dealer. This is 1947, 48, 47, and the antiquities dealer says, I'll give you $5,000 for it. How much do you think that was worth? What did the man say? That was more money than he had ever heard of, sure. So he sold it. This is 1Q Isaiah A. This is the oldest written copy of the Bible we have anywhere in the world. What do you think happened after that guy paid $5,000 for that manuscript? Well, and the desert's full of little caves like that. So they call this 1Q Isaiah A because this is the first cave at Qumran. What do you think 4Q stands for? And 88 stands for the 88th manuscript that they found. 4Q88 reads, they dug through. That's pre-70 AD. What's the oldest witness now? So, there was a place, this is another place out in the middle of nowhere. There are 2 caves, one here, one here. One's called the Cave of Horrors, one's called the Cave of Books.
Okay.
During the Roman war, they chased Jews into these 2 caves, and the Jews said, well, come get us. And the Romans said, how about we just starve you to death? So they starved them to death. And so the Cave of Horrors are all the people who fled to the cave. The soldiers, once all those people were dead, went down into the Cave of Horrors and made sure everybody was dead. They also went in the Cave of Books. And they were so mad, they just started cutting books up. But they left them there. This is 5-6 Nahal Hever of Psalm 22, 50 AD. What's the reading? Okay, and you can see this is a short one. This is a short one. This is a short one. What is that? So what does 5-6 Nahal Hever read? They pierced. So what happened? what happened was this. A Jewish person came along and said, we're getting creamed with this pierce my hands and feet. And so what did somebody do in a manuscript? They did that. And they said, who's ever going to know? And they almost got away with it. But God saw that we would have evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's pierced. And if it's pierced, what does that mean? It's a prophecy of Jesus that was written 1,000 years before it happened. I'll see you on Monday.